At this point in time, Rosemary Ellen and Guiley and I finally got together and were able to do a book on a lot of the different items. And after the talk, feel free to come on over to our table. We got all kinds of stuff there. Talk about one of the very first items that I have up here, the clown. Now, they're very innocent items. Very seldomly will they cause any type of issues with people. But when people end up picking them up and they bring them home, you know, from estate sales, tax sales, and they end up adding them to the collection, you got to be careful. Why? These things are considered very innocent, and there shouldn't really be any intent or any purpose with something happening with them that they should wreak any type of havoc. But that's where you got to be very careful. Why? That's when people will end up doing mojo, doing different things over these items. And they can wreak havoc once they're brought in. Woman had picked this one up. Again, it's a collection of clowns she had, and she started having a lot of activity. Now, the reason we really can home in on an item and say that it's causing the disturbance is the fact that we'll ask them if it's a particular room where there's things occurring or things happening, and ask them if they brought something new into that environment. And if we find out we did, we usually just ask them, take it out of there, let's see if everything calms down before I even usually go in to investigate. She agreed to do that, and everything subsided. And a lot of times I'll say, well, we'll bring it back in and let's see what's going to happen. We usually say, what are you, nuts? I'm not bringing it back in. But, you know, some people will, just so we can see if things are occurring and what's happening around the item. Then we will go in to investigate. We definitely found out that there was definitely some serious energy that is attached to this particular clown. Now, I usually name all my different items. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But after this conference, this one just got the name of Bette Midler. Anyhow, like I said, these different items and these different things can wreak a lot of havoc and cause problems. And sometimes it's like looking for a needle in the haystack, trying to figure out what's causing it, what triggers it. Because you have to remember, everything is energy. We're energy. And everything associates with it. Even though these items, you know, don't have a spirit, energy, or soul associated with them, they still can have residual energy or energy in general just attached to it. We pick these things up, we're like a battery. We touch it and it can activate an item. That's why I'm very guarded and cautious with a lot of the items when people are dealing with them. And today it's very fashionable. People pick them up, they're buying them and bringing them into their homes. And that's very dangerous. Why? You start bringing them in and you have that collective energy that pulls together. It can wreak a lot of havoc. That's why I know some collectors out there, and I'll get phone calls from them. They have hundreds of items in their houses that are haunted. John, what do I do? What do you want me to tell you? You brought in all these haunted items. You're going to have paranormal activity sooner or later. I always tell people, be very careful when you do that. Let's see the next one that we got up there. Teddy bear. Again, a lot of times we find people seem to get themselves really wrapped up into their personal emotion. This teddy bear was given to a young lady, her husband that she married, and his best friend really liked the same woman. But he bowed out, basically his buddy ended up marrying her. But afterwards he decided he really didn't like the idea of that whole thing. And he would always continuously buy her gifts and give them to her. And, the husband was aware of the circumstances and everything. Well, things intensified in the house. They were fighting. There was all kinds of crazy things going on. It started to affect one of the children. So we went over to investigate. We're trying to make heads or tails of what in the world was triggering this whole thing. Finally, I got to meet the friend, and he came in, and we were talking, going back and forth, and I could tell just by the way he was looking at her that he definitely still had a lot of feeling for her. And as we interviewed him and spoke and everything, and he left, and I said, okay, you're going to have to tell me the whole scoop. What's the whole thing with this and everything? And she looks at me, she goes, you're psychic. I go, no, I'm not psychic. I said, but I can tell you just by the way he's looking at you, he likes you. So, again, she filled us in and everything, and, and this is, she started telling me, she says, he always brings me gifts and everything. She started to explain to me, and I said, well, what was the last item he gave to you? And she says, it was this little teddy bear. And she goes, now that I think about it, she said, that's when things started to escalate in the house. So we removed the teddy bear. We didn't tell him anything about it, and things calmed down for several days. But the strange thing was, he figured it out. He said, John figured out that somehow, some way, this was all tying in. So naturally, as things were progressing, we had a meeting, and he was there, and I confronted him about it, and he fessed up. He was doing different things, and he got a hold of some different people out there that were doing bad mojo over these things to try to win her over so she would leave her husband. So again, you got to be very careful with these types of items and different things. When it comes into personal emotion, I usually find people will do anything they can to try to get that person that they're most close to, and they really have that connection too. The next item, Virgin Mary. This is from The Haunting in Connecticut. Any of you seen the documentary on TV? If you haven't, watch it. It's very close, very accurate to what had happened in that home. Severe things took place. We spent 9.5 weeks in that home researching it. Carmen Snedeker, Carmen Reed, she lectures quite heavily on what happened in that home. Unfortunately, they did a theatrical movie, and they just blew things a little bit out of proportion in it. So it really didn't line up too much on a lot of the things that did occur in the home. But it was a very dramatic point in my career 26 years ago, where one night as we were sitting there, I was documenting things, and it got very cold. It was the month of August, and I got up from the table. Everybody was sleeping, and went up to this big grand staircase, looked up, and there was this big black shadow form, had a terrible odor to it and everything, and it started descending down the staircase. And basically at that point, I audibly had heard it. It said, do you know what they did to us? Well, at that point, the only thing I was interested in was getting my car keys and getting the hell out of there. I mean, that really rocked my boat, let me tell you. For 3 days straight, didn't talk to anybody, wanted nothing to do with it. I made a decision that was it for me in the paranormal. But we had a very good friend in the family. He was a bishop, and he calls me up. He goes, John, you won't talk to anybody, and we don't even understand what happened. So I called him Bish, and I explained everything to him. I said, you know what, Saint, you can have the whole freaking bunch of these. I ain't dealing with this ever again. And he got very quiet, and he said, well, then you're going to let it win. What it set out to do was to scare you so that you won't be involved with helping people anymore. And he said, if you do not go back, or if you do not help people again, it won what it set out to do. Again, he was right once I thought about that. I knew the exorcism was sanctioned. It was going to be performed several days afterwards, so I did go back into the home. During the course of the exorcism, we had 3 Roman Catholic priests that were involved with that. That was sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church, which is very rare because they reserve the right of exorcism normally just for people, never on property, never on homes or businesses. What that will be would be a totally different perspective and a way they'll handle it with the prayers. But during the course of it, we had a lot of activity and everything finally calmed down. It was extremely successful. As one of the priests were going around and he was collecting some of the holy items they had put in each and every room, he went into the living room and looked at the mantle, and we heard him. We all ran into the room, and we looked, and there was this little Blessed Mother, and her hands were literally melted off. And the priest wouldn't touch it. He wanted nothing to do with it. So anyways, got everything all squared away. Once everything calmed down, Carmen and her family had moved down south, and they went out of the spotlight. They didn't want to deal with any of this. And many years later, Carmen and I had teamed up, like 12 years later. She waited until all the kids were grown before she started speaking publicly about it. And she said, John, I got something for you. I want you to put in your museum. And she took this out of her pocketbook. And I went, Carmen, you kept that all these years? And she goes, yes, John. And she gave it to me, and today I keep it in the museum as a representation of what had happened. Again, something so holy, and it's a blessed object, but yet what was in that home was able to melt the hands right off of this. The fireplace wasn't burning, it was August. So it was just one of those very unique things that occurred and had happened in the haunting in Connecticut. Next slide, please. Always be careful with military items. Why? Doesn't mean they've seen battle, doesn't mean that there might be bloodstains on it, but can they hold on to the emotions of someone that has served? Absolutely. This is an old West Point jacket. Young lady thought it was the coolest thing. She had picked it up at an estate sale. She thought it'd be cool to wear it and everything, so she brought it home, and she started having a lot of activity, mainly in her room. She would hear men speaking, she would see black shadow forms, and things were getting super intense. Well, the mother was trying to figure out what was going on and everything, and she turned and looked at her daughter at one point in time. She did say to her, she says, I think it has something to do with that jacket you picked up. The mother literally took it away. She put it out in the garage. Everything totally calmed down. Well, the girl wanted to start to wear it again. Didn't say anything to her mom, brought it back in, and that night, all kinds of things were happening. She was claiming she heard battles going on. She was hearing different people speaking. Black shadow forms was super intense. Well, the mom ended up giving me a quick telephone call, and she described everything to me, and I went up to the house immediately and picked it up. Here again, we're not able to actually date them. The West Point jackets haven't changed since the 1800s. They've kept the same pattern, the same way they've made them over the years and everything, but we basically feel this might be coming from around the era of World War I. So once it was removed and everything, all the activity calmed right down, and they were able to move on with their life. But again, especially collectors of a lot of military things, I talk to them continuously, and a lot of them pick up things from, that were legitimately in battles and things like that. Got to be careful. Very, very careful. It doesn't mean that it's going to be something demonic, but you're going to get paranormal activity because you think about the emotion that could be tied in with some of those items. It could be very severe, and it could be very, very strong. So always be very careful when picking these types of things up and bringing them into your home. Next item, please. Always remember the items that come from any of the islands. All these things are carved to represent different deities, and the majority of the time, when they are working on it, these are all done by hand. They're usually sitting in their circles and everything, and they will call upon spirit as they're working on things to help them do a better job. Or it can be made to represent something. In their culture, this is quite common on all of the islands, over in Africa and everywhere, and they do that. Now, when people pick these things up and they bring them back and they put them into their homes, they're going to wreak havoc. Why? A lot of times you have that conflict of belief systems. So when you bring it in and something starts to happen, again, I'll start asking people about different things, and people don't realize a lot of the statues, and mainly these masks, they're all carved to represent different deities that are out there. Remember, they're not really doing something wrong. That's their belief system. That's their culture. So be very guarded, very cautious when you bring these things in. Don't get me wrong, I know people that have masks that haven't had any issues whatsoever, but I end up dealing with the people that have once they have brought them in. Again, a lot of times you have certain types of things that are intertwined with these to represent things also. And as they're working on them, like I said, they're praying, they're chanting, and they're doing different things as they're carving them. A lot of people don't realize that. And they're calling upon the spirit to help them be able to make a real nice piece of art, if you will. So if you pick them up, just be carved, have them in areas where, they're not going to wreak havoc. And please be extra cautious and careful, especially if you have children in the house. Children are the most sensitive, and spirit is going to gravitate right towards them. So it's something that you really want to take a close look at when you're bringing things in and you have them around. Next item, please. Again, one of the probably rarest things I've ever received in my collection. This came from an old tomb. It's an old oil lamp. And it's one of the most unique things that I've ever seen. Someone was abroad and they had been working and digging things out in a particular tomb, and they had brought it back. And they didn't really want to keep it. They gave it to another family member. And they started having, again, the crazy dreams, a lot of activity. They were feeling like they were suffocating. There's all kinds of things going on with this particular individual. And when they started describing the item to me, it was being explained to me, and when they told me where it came from an old tomb, and I was like, uh-oh. I said, you got to be very careful with that. And the person was asking me for details, and I says, if you have what I think you have, I said, let me come over and sit down and talk to you about it. So I did. And you have to remember, we refer, and a lot of you are more familiar today, about jinn or djinn. It's pronounced both different ways. It's a very, very ancient, old type of spirit that we deal with. Many of them, they predate what we call devils and demons and deities. They were here long before any of us or anything was here on earth. They're very intelligent, they're very smart, and they can trick you very easily. And their intent is to really torment individuals and really be able to take control of environments in comparison to actually trying to possess somebody. Now this, again, like I said, it was an old oil lamp. And years ago, and they still do it today, is a lot of times when someone comes in to do a clearing or something, they will bind or deliberately take that energy, seal it into an item, and a lot of times pour the salt over it. Any of you that are familiar with watching my show, over the years, I use a lot of sea salt. Why? It has a high iron content, and it helps to calm and neutralize energy. Therefore, we're able to seal things a lot easier. And for anybody that's not aware of it, all rituals, doesn't matter the denomination out there, Roman Catholic, Judaism, everybody uses salt, and it's been used for thousands of years with all different types of blessings and sealings and different things of that nature. So again, when this came into the environment of an individual, they started rubbing it because they thought it was funny, genie in the lamp. This really triggered a lot of activity, sparked up a lot of things with this individual. And she says, but I was just making a joke of it. Again, think twice before you do anything. When you're reading something, or you're reading a spell, or doing something, you're giving it recognition. You're opening up that door and allowing spirit and allowing things to actually come through, and they can wreak havoc on your life. And when we explained everything to her, how it was happening, and why it was occurring, that poor woman totally shaken right to the core over the fact that these things could be legitimate and they can actually happen and wreak a lot of different types of things on an individual. The jacket and the lamp are a couple of things that are in the new book that Rosemary has available. Right now, because to me one of the most important things out of anything is to open up the floor so that you can ask questions. That I feel everybody gets more out of that. You get more of a better understanding of some of the things that go on in the paranormal when dealing with haunted items or dealing with anything, within the paranormal. Remember, I'm the only man around, been around 42 years, and usually if there's something going on or something that I can answer, I will gladly do that for you so that you can get a better understanding of it. Okay, who has their first question? I know they're walking around with mics somewhere. Oh, there he goes.
My question is do you ever do a clearing or a cleansing on the objects, or do you always leave them contained and sealed?
Do I do a clearing and a binding on the objects? Each and every one of them. There's a set way that I do things, from a spiritual, religious thing with each item. Everything has something done to it before it comes into the big paranormal barn on my property. Remember, none of these things are in my house because I don't know if they get thrown out before me or what by my wife, but I know I can't have them in the house. It just will not happen. But there's a little tiny barn where I do this. I have a lot of clergy friends that I work with, and I'll always ask them, to please do their mojo over them to help seal or break that energy. Then I bring them into the bigger barn and put them on display. Anybody else? Where are you? Oh. I
guess my question is kind of, in the world the Annabelle doll is what do you think is the equivalent of the Annabelle doll in your collection?
What do I think is the equivalent to the Annabelle doll in my collection? It's very hard for me to even say something like that or answer it because I have so many things that have been removed from investigations and working with them. I mean, there's probably the one that I refer to as the idol, and that young man got himself involved with practicing things, and over several weeks, he ended up literally destroying his life. He wasn't going to school, wasn't functioning, and this thing has a lot of bad mojo with it. And his parents went up into his room, and he had this big altar set up with the idol right in the center of it. It's a creepy looking thing. And again, he kept claiming the different things that were occurring and happening. He felt that when he was summoning things in, plus what was with it, was really wreaking havoc, and it started telling him to kill himself. So when they look at stuff like that, there's a lot of hardcore energy attached with that, the ritual type items and things of all that. When you see some of them that line up and some of these things that have really wreaked havoc in a person's life. We got
So, in regards to binding these items, have you ever had to rebind something, or have you ever had any bleed through, or any bad experiences with something, despite what you do to protect yourself from them?
Yeah, she's asking, once the bindings and everything are done, do they have to be re-performed? Absolutely. This is an element where a lot of times when you do bind and seal something, you hope that it can never be touched again, and that doesn't always happen. Especially if we leave it in a home or something, I always tell people, please don't touch it, don't do anything to it, because that can actually break it. And again, people do things very innocently by touching it, then they start thinking about it, and it gives it recognition, therefore it's going to bring it right back to the forefront again. So, with the museum and everything, especially when we were doing the TV show, continuously production people were touching things and moving things all over the place. And, it just reached a point where it was just like, okay, I might as well just wait till we're done filming before I go back down there to do anything. And, but that's very key and very important to continuously, do things and update things as far as trying to keep things contained and making sure that things are safe. Yeah.
Because you're in contact with a lot of these haunted items, do you have stuff that happens to you all the time? Because when you go and take them before the binding happens, okay?
She's asking, do I have a lot of paranormal activity? I probably still do, and I'll tell you, I'm very numb to stuff now. It's kind of sad, but it's not sad, but it takes a lot for something to catch my attention. A lot of times when, because I work with a lot of universities in my area, and they have paranormal groups, and, a lot of them come in and, study and mentor with me, trying to teach them about a lot of things. And, they catch a tremendous amount of EVPs and psychic photography and, all kinds of things. I'll have friends that are, gifted and psychic will walk through the museum and pick up on things that I usually don't talk about. So there is a tremendous amount that goes on in the barn. And the funniest story is, last summer, a buddy of mine came up. I used to investigate with him for years and years, and he got out of the work. I'm sitting in my office, because it's up on the upper level in the barn. I'm on the cell phone, the landline's ringing. I'm on the computer, I'm going crazy. And he's just sitting there, and I'm just looking at his face, right? And I went, oh, something's going on, right? And, going back and forth, so finally I got off of everything, and I looked down and I went, what? He goes, somebody just walked up the stairs. Didn't you hear the back door slam? And he says, something just fell over in the other room. And I went, yeah, so. He goes, you're dead to all this stuff now. He says, you didn't even react to any of it. I go, it goes on all the time. I don't think anything of it. So again, it takes a lot for me to even really pay attention to the environment and what's happening. I'll be very honest with you, I get a bigger kick out of watching new researchers today than I do watching myself, because it's just like, they're like me 30, 40 years ago. You know, you get all excited, you get scared, and you know, it's. I just don't pay attention to much anymore. I tune a lot of it out. My wife keeps saying it's a guy thing. I don't know. Who's got the?
What do your neighbors think about this?
Depends on the day, really. No, seriously, years ago, most of my neighbors didn't even want us in the neighborhood. Honestly, I couldn't talk about it, never shared anything, because I didn't want the kids paying the price for what I did. So, you know, kept it very quiet, but there were several of them that ended up finding out about it and everything. And, you know, it was a very rough thing, you know, especially with my two oldest daughters. Dad, don't talk about it. Dad, don't tell nobody. You know, I was fine with all that. And then with my son, it was a 360-degree thing. Oh, I'm the coolest dad on the block now. The TV show comes out, all my neighbors want to talk to me, you know? And then I'm like, oh, for 20 years you didn't want to talk to me, now you want to? You know what I have to say. But, again, you know, I can understand that with most people. And I was always very concerned a lot of times, too, you know, with the neighbors and the environment, because, you know, that's when you're on TV and stuff like that, you're going to have issues and things like that. And it was great because a lot of them just keep an eye on things. Now, you know, if there's anybody strange around or anything. So, you know, you watch how we evolved, and it's a cool thing. It's really cool to watch how that all came about. So, most of us, I think, went through that in years past. You know, relatives or friends would find out you got involved with the paranormal. Right away, you're worshiping Satan. I don't worship. Oh, yes, you do. Oh, yes, you do. You're going to burn in hell. You're going to burn in hell. I'm like, but then again, now it's like even some of those cousins. Hey, cousin Johnny, I go, you didn't talk to me for 20 years? You know what I got to tell them, too. Who else?
Hi, I just wondered if any of your episodes, did you ever have to pick up a haunted mirror or a cursed mirror?
Yes. The one case, and it just got, I don't know, it was just one of the most intense episodes we ever shot, and that was Joplin, Missouri, where the tornado had gone through. 3 generations of the family were involved with the rescue and recovery, and they had this mirror, and they were having a lot of activity, you know, staircase around this mirror. And as we were involved with it, and things were unfolding, you know, it was like a double whammy for this investigation. It was affecting each and every family member, and we were dealing with this mirror that really got activated. Then we had found out that one of the relatives that was tied in with this mirror had passed away with nothing to do with the mirror. And as things went on and things were escalating, it just became one of the most personal things I've ever gotten involved with. And, you know, we were going to focus it at the end of the storyline as John removed the mirror. But as, like I said, it was such an emotional episode to watch. It just basically, we had it more on a personal level than anything else. I mean, we were dealing with a gentleman, and, you know, the horrific events he didn't want to share with his children. And, you know, as we were doing the reveal, he was explaining to me, you know, just out of the clear blue, he just totally lost and fell apart. He says, you know, I let somebody down. And I said, what are you talking about? You let somebody down? He said, a gentleman was impaled, and I kept holding him. Hang on there, everything's going to be okay. You're going to make it. You're going to make it. And he said he died in his arms. And this tormented him. And he goes, I let him down. And he was a doctor and everything. And, you know, and I just said, and I just turned and looked at him, and I said, no, you didn't. He goes, yes, I did, John. I go, no, you didn't. He didn't die by himself. You were there for him. I said, so you did accomplish something. You did do something, because he did not die alone. And I mean, it was you know, I started crying. Amy's crying. The whole production team just shut right down. Everybody fell apart. Next thing I know, I got phone calls coming in from out on the West Coast from production and everything else. And they're going, oh my God, this dramatic footage. You to see something and to be able to get something like that. So anyways, to end it, just sat down the entire family and talked to everybody and got them to open up about what they all experienced during the recovery after that disaster. They were on the process of being able to heal because they were able to let a lot of that information out. But that tied around the mirror. It's in the museum today, but it was just like, as things went through, it was just like, who cared about the mirror at that point? It was more of a dynamic of, witnessing and being able to help the individuals to start the healing process.